This is the AYN Thor, and it is probably my new daily driver for emulating video games as well as playing low power, not so demanding Steam games. That's right, this thing can also play Steam games. I'll talk more about that later on in the video, but I've had this for about 2 weeks now, and I have been testing the hell out of it, and I gotta say, I am really impressed. Now, I do want to point out that AYN did send this over free of charge, but they are not seeing this ahead of time. No money changed hands. This is not an ad. This is just my thoughts about the AYN Thor. All right, let's take a look at the AYN Thor. I'm going to start on the bottom. We've got our power button right there with our volume rocker to the left. We've got our USB-C port. There's only one USB-C port on this. I would have liked to see two. One on the top and then one on the bottom, but I think that's pretty good. We've had our 3.5 millimeter headphone jack and our SD card reader. We got little spots for lanyards if you want to use a lanyard with this. On the back, we have our intake, and then it looks like our exhaust vents right there. And then on the top, we can see we've got our bumpers, which feel nice and clicky. Those feel really good, actually. And then we have our triggers, and if I hold this up, we can see our triggers. They actually are full triggers, and you can see that as I pull them, you're getting actually quite a lot of travel for a trigger that's just so absolutely tiny. Surprising how tiny that is and how much throw you actually have on those triggers. Nothing on the left and nothing on the right, so let's go ahead and open it up. And as you can see, let's start with the hinge. So as I open this up, I'm going to open it up like this. You can see that the first natural stopping point is right there at that angle. And then there's another right here. And then a third natural stopping point when you get to 180 degrees. I think when I hold it, the best option right here for me right now is having it at the second stopping point. The first stopping point is just a little too vertical for me. I would have to hold it like this. If I'm at the second stopping point, it feels completely natural. And then the third stopping point, I feel like I have to rotate my wrists up. So I like that there's options, but the second stopping point is definitely, for me, the sweet spot. Let's take a look at the joysticks. They look to be Nintendo Switch style joysticks, Nintendo Switch 1 joysticks, not Switch 2 joysticks. They feel pretty good. There seems to be a good amount of resistance. They are offset instead of being side by side. So, you know, depending on what your preferences are, that could be a good thing or that could be a bad thing. They do click, and I like the way that the click feels. Underneath the left joystick, looks like there might be, I think this might be like a microphone port so that you can like yell at your Nintendogs or something if you're playing that game. Then underneath, we've got our D-pad. Let's see what that feels like. Oh, this D-pad feels really, really good. I hope that it works as well as it feels when I'm just, you know, testing it with the device completely off. This D-pad feels absolutely fantastic. And I've never used an AYN device before, so I don't know if this is the normal for their D-pads, but it's clicky without being loud, and I like that a lot. Moving over to the face buttons over here, let's see the face buttons. They feel less clicky than the D-pad. They're a little bit softer, but they have a lot more travel. I don't know if you guys will be able to see this, but I'm just going to hold it up here, and I'm going to click down the yellow one. You can see how much travel you're actually getting to push on those. It feels very, very good. I am a big fan of how that feels overall. Around the bottom screen, we have, looks like a stop button, a play button, a home button, and then a back button. And then underneath the screen, we have an AYN button. I don't know what that does yet, but we'll find out after I turn this thing on. And obviously, we have our 16 by 9 inch screen, or not inch, but 16 by 9 aspect ratio screen on the top, and a 4:3 aspect ratio on the bottom. Speaking of the bottom, they covered the bottom in glass, which usually, like when I see companies like, I forget who makes this. This is AYN. They make the Conquer Pocket Fit, and it's got glass all across the front. It turns into an absolute fingerprint magnet, as you can see as I move this around on here. There's so many fingerprints all over the device, which I really, really don't like. But because this is glass on a light color, those fingerprints don't seem like they're showing up nearly as much. In fact, I'm putting my finger down right here between the face buttons and then the right stick. And then if I rotate this, you can see, you can kind of see the fingerprint there, but you kind of have to be like looking for it. And I think that having a glass on the front like this is only a good idea when you have light colors like this. I don't know if the AYN Thor comes in black, but if it does, I'm going to guess that it's a fingerprint magnet and not something that you want to mess with. Or maybe that doesn't bother you. Down here on the bottom, we have our front firing speakers, and it feels fairly dense in the hand. And when I'm holding it in my hand like this, I can see how it might get uncomfortable after a while. Now, I don't know if they ship this with everything, because this came in a separate case. So I'm going to assume that this is like an accessory that they only sent to me because I'm a content creator, and you would probably have to buy this separately. I'll put something on screen if that's not the case. But you're going to put this on here and slide it in, and this really makes it a lot easier to grip because you've got like these big grips that are pushing into your palms, which is a lot better than if I take it back off. I kind of tend to support this with my pinkies down on the bottom, almost the same way that I do when like I'm holding a phone and I put it resting on my pinky, which I've never really been a fan of that. So this is pretty good. This, as far as comfort goes, feels really good. I'm a big fan of how this feels, even though it looks really ugly. I'm gonna go ahead and close the clamshell now, and it looks like it kind of fills in the gap between the lid and then the base. If I take, oh, look at that. They even cut it off around the intake grill, which is good. I'm gonna take this back off, and you can see that that gap is there all the way across. So using their case is not going to damage the hinge or the lid on there. The hinge feels pretty good as I wiggle it back and forth. We'll see how it lasts in the long run. Hinges are always the thing that you have to worry about when you have a clamshell, but overall, I think the overall build of this thing is really nice. It feels hefty in the hand without being heavy, and I can't wait to turn this thing on and see what it's like. So this D-pad actually passes the Iron Meat test with flying colors. If you've never seen me do one of these tests, basically what I do is I load into the game Iron Meat, which is a Steam game. This is a Steam game playing on an Android device, which is awesome. But I load into Iron Meat, which is very similar to Contra. Then I press down on the D-pad so that my character lays down, and I wiggle my finger back and forth to see if I start to get accidental diagonals. And I have to say, unless I'm pushing really hard, that's the only time that I get accidental diagonals. When I am just pushing with like a regular amount of force, this guy just stays exactly where he is. But then if I pick it up and I want to do diagonals, I have no problem doing this. This is a very, very good D-pad. Let's test it out in fighting games though. All right, so I've got Marvel vs. Capcom 2 here, and I'm gonna try firing off some Hadoukens on this D-pad. And those are working pretty well. Let's try some Shoryukens. Whoops. And I think I'm hitting it probably about 80% of the time, which for me is not too bad. I've always had trouble firing off those types of moves. Now, there are multiple versions of the Thor. This is the Thor Pro. It has a 6-inch AMOLED 1920 by 1080p main screen that goes up to 120 Hz refresh rate, which is really important when it comes to black frame insertion. We'll talk about that later. The bottom screen is a 3.92-inch AMOLED screen, 1240 by 1080. It's a 60 Hz screen. The processor in this is the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with a 4nm process. The GPU is the Adreno 740 at 680 MHz. If you decided to go with the Thor Lite instead, that would have a Snapdragon 865 processor and an Adreno 650 GPU instead. The Pro comes with 12 gigs of LPDDR5X RAM at 4200 MHz. The Thor Base comes with 8 gigs, and the Max comes with 16 gigs. Storage comes in 3 varieties, 128 gigs, 256 gigs, that's this one, and 1 terabyte for the Max version. The battery is a 6,000 milliamp hour battery with a 27 watt charge speed. It has Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 5.3, And the USB port on the bottom is Type-C 3.1, which supports display out with up to 4K 60 output. When you plug it in, whatever's on the top screen is what automatically goes to the TV screen, which is great. Bluetooth also works absolutely fantastic. I paired my 8BitDo M30 controller to it, and as soon as I had it up on running on the TV, I was able to control with this, and I didn't have to jump through any hoops in order to get that to happen, which is really good. However, there is one drawback, and that drawback is you can't close the clamshell. So if you want to like have a docking station that just has a USB port sticking up and you could just drop this into that USB port and have it work, it doesn't actually work. So I would really like to see a firmware update where it allows us to give that option to close the clamshell when we're plugged into a TV, so we wouldn't have to have it open and have these screens on when they don't need to be on. All right, let's actually push this button on the bottom down here, which will allow us to bring up this little fancy menu, which is incredibly cool. So first off, we got three options all along the bottom. We have our mode, our task, and then our settings. First off, on mode, I can set it to be dual screen display like I have it now. You can see that both screens are on. If I say only top screen, it's going to tell me when the secondary screen is turned off. You can press the AYN key to wake up the screen. I'm going to say okay. And now it turns off the bottom screen, but the top screen is still on if you're trying to eke out just a little bit more battery life. If I want to turn this back on, I just push the AYN button again and it turns on. If I just want to have the bottom screen on, it automatically turns off the top screen. And then if I want to turn the top screen back on, I would just go back to dual screen mode. You can also control the brightness of the two screens independently. So let's say I want to control both at the same time. I can do that very easily just by sliding this top slider right here. But if I want the top screen to be brighter for some reason, then I can just grab the middle one and drag that up, and it leaves the bottom screen kind of dim. I can dim that one way down if I want, and you can just do whatever it is that you want there. It's really, really cool. I usually tend to leave them at about 50% brightness, and that's what you're seeing right now with my studio lights shining on this thing. It looks really, really great. Now, another thing that you can do is you can also control the volume of the top and the bottom screens independently. So as you can see here, I'm playing Golden Axe up on the top. You can see that it's flickering. That doesn't actually happen in real life. That's because of an OLED screen and my camera kind of incompatible with each other. We're going to have to live with that. On the bottom screen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a podcast. So like here's a podcast that I'm listening to. It's called the Play Retro Show, and it's about retro games, as you can imagine. And if I press my AYN button right now, the top screen is at 50%. Bottom screen is almost silent. So I'm going to crank up the bottom. And now I can hear the podcast while I'm playing. I can hear them both independently of each other. It's really, really cool. All right, next up is the task button. If I press the task button, it's going to bring up all of the different apps that I currently have running on here. One thing that I would really like to see either on this screen here, or if I bring up the bottom buttons again, if I could just add an extra button to this row on the bottom, is the ability to take whatever thing is on the screen on the top screen and move it down to the bottom, and move anything that's on the bottom up to the top. So essentially I could just push one button and have the two screens swap with each other. That would be really handy if I'm playing a 4x3 game and I'm watching a 16:9 video on the top screen. That would be really cool if I could just simply do one button push to flip them. And then if I decide, okay, well now I'm going to play a 16:9 game, I'll put that up on the top screen and then bring my podcast or whatever that I'm watching down to the bottom and watch that in 4x3 instead, because my real focus is on what's happening on the top screen. All right, let's move on over to the settings tab. The settings tab here will show me what my current frame rate is. Right now it's saying that I'm running at 60 frames per second. I would say that whatever this says is probably mostly ignorable because it almost never matches what's actually happening up here. So if you want to see what frames per second you're running, you would want to turn that on in whatever emulation app you are currently using. But right above there is a little button, and if I tap that button, it's going to switch this over to 120 hertz. So now this top screen is running at 120 hertz. And you might wonder, why would I want that if I'm playing a game like, Super Mario All-Stars for the Super Nintendo? Let me show you why. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my RetroArch settings. I'm going to hit B. I'm going to move over to my settings, and I'm going to come down to video. Under video, I'm going to go into synchronization, and then I'm going to come down here to black frame insertion. What black frame insertion does is every other frame it's going to replace with a black frame. So currently, this game is running at 120 hertz. It's still going to be running at 120 hertz, but every other frame is going to be black. Now watch what happens when I turn that on. You're going to see that it gets a good deal darker. So you set it to 1 for 120 hertz refresh rate. And now it's a lot darker than it was before. And you can see like this flashing that's happening on the screen. I don't actually see that flashing. That's just an effect of my camera and the 120 hertz refresh rate. And then the black frames being inserted in there as well. Why would you actually want this? Well, the reason that you get this is because it increases your motion clarity. I can't capture what this looks like with my camera, but I'm telling you, this looks really, really good. Now you'll also notice that it got darker, so I can go back to my mode and I can say, all right, in this case, I'm going to crank up the brightness on my top screen so that visually it matches what's happening on the bottom screen. Now, that might be a little too much, but visually it matches what's happening on the bottom screen. And then as I play, I've got really nice motion clarity because of the black frame insertion. And I also have like these matching displays, which is really cool. For the rest of the video, though, I'm going to turn that off because it's kind of distracting because the camera doesn't work with it. So I'm going to go in here. Black frame insertion is now turned off. And now I'm going to switch this back over to 60 hertz. And then I'm going to go back to my mode, and I'm going to set both screens to be the same brightness, which is about 50%. Now back into the settings menu, below our FPS counter, we also have our current temperature, what fan speed we're currently running at, how much of the CPU is being used, how much of the GPU is being used, how much power is being used, as well as how much RAM is being used. Let's look at this little set of buttons right here. This one right here will control which buttons or which screen your buttons are going to interact with. So for example, let's say that I get rid of this. It's currently set to auto toggle. So if I tap the top screen and then I move around, Mario's going to move. But if I tap the bottom screen and then I move around, you can see that I have icons moving around instead. If I bring up my AYN button and I hit auto lock, I'm going to say auto lock to the top screen. And now my buttons are going to affect what's happening on the top, and no buttons are going to affect what happens on the bottom, which is great. For some reason, every time I boot this thing up though, it switches back to auto lock, and I wish it would just stay on the top screen, but maybe that'll be a feature that we can have somewhere down the line. Underneath that, we have our controller style. We have standard style, Xbox style, and then ban on use. I don't know why it says ban on use, but that just means turn off the internal controllers if you need to. Xbox style, I generally won't use unless I'm playing PC games, and then it'll basically make the A button down here, the B button over here, and then flip your X and Y buttons as well. Right here, we have our performance mode, standard, medium, and high performance. I'll talk about what kind of battery life I got later on in the video at different performance profiles. This is really cool. If you have this plugged in and you're playing it, then you can run it off of the cord going into the wall instead of using your battery. So, you know, if in the future you get like a little dock that lets you plug this in, and hopefully they make it so that when you close the clamshell, the video out stays on. Oh, we turned it off. If we did all of that, then you would have this automatically tapped whenever you are plugged into a wall, and then you are going to have a healthier battery in the long run. Then if we take a look at our fan, we have turned off, quiet mode, smart mode, and sports mode. If you switch from standard to medium, it automatically switches over to smart mode. And if you switch over to high profile, it will automatically stay in smart mode. But if you go to standard performance, you can see that it automatically switches to quiet mode. This button will let you clear out your memory. So if I press this button, it's just going to say it cleans up 3 processes and then gets rid of extra memory that's being used by something that isn't actually being used anymore. And then this button right here will let you turn on and adjust your joystick LEDs. So I can turn them on, and now I have my LEDs. I can change their color if I want. I can change them to yellow or orange or whatever, and I can change them based on the left one being this color, the right one being this color. You can also change the saturation of how bright that is and how actually bright it is as well. It gets really, really bright, but the best way is to just have them both set to off, because I don't like LEDs on here. Next up, I want to go over my battery test, but I figure this is a good point to go ahead and put in my sound test so you can hear what these speakers sound like. They are front firing speakers, which is awesome. Here's what they sound like at 50%. And then here's what they sound like at 100%. In order to test battery life, I did what I've been doing recently with my tests, is where I would run a game for roughly 10 minutes. I would see what the battery was at the beginning, what the battery was at the end, and then I would calculate by extrapolating out how long the battery would last if I just played that continuously. For 8-bit systems or 16-bit systems like the NES or Super NES or Sega Genesis, you're going to get a ridiculous, it's more than 16 hours. I think it calculated out to 16.7 hours of battery life on this. This chip is very, very efficient, and you can run those games on this all day long. For PS2 games like God of War 2, I was running that at standard performance, and I got roughly 5 hours of battery life with this. For 3DS games like A Link Between Worlds, I was getting roughly 8 hours of battery life. For PC games, I used GameHub in order to install Batman Arkham City, and I ran the built-in benchmark over and over for my next test. This was on the high performance profile, as you can see right here, and with the top screen was set to 120 Hertz. I got about 2.4 hours of battery life out of this. I will note that the average frames per second on the benchmark was about 50, and the lowest was somewhere around 30, depending on which run I was talking about. And I will say, I think that this is pretty impressive. I mean, I'm running a Steam game on an Android handheld at 720p. There's a lot of emulation layers happening and like Proton's in there doing its thing, and I'm still getting 2.5 hours of battery life. And on top of that, I'm getting roughly 30 frames per second as like my worst numbers and 50 frames per second as my best numbers. That's pretty good. And then finally, I ran 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme Stress Test, which runs the same test over and over and over for 20 full minutes. Extrapolating that data out, I got roughly 3 hours of battery life running that. And what's even better about this is if you turn this sideways, you can see that my best loop score was 3619. My lowest loop score was 3607. The closer those two numbers are together, the better. And I got a stability of 99.7% on this. That's really good. So I guess the worst case scenario for battery life on the AYN Thor is you're going to get somewhere between 2 and 3 hours if you are really pushing that system. And at best case, if you are running really low end games, you're going to get somewhere between 16 and 17 hours of gameplay before your battery runs out. That's awesome. And as I've already shown you a couple times, you can see that it actually runs PC games. You can see I've got some PC games installed right here. This is using GameHub, which is made by the same company that makes the GameSir controllers. Now, there's a lot of people who are apprehensive about using this particular app because it is linked to a Chinese company, and it does kind of soak up a little bit of information. I am not here recommending that people use it, and I'm not recommending against people use it because I'm not knowledgeable when it comes to like security kind of things. What I will say is that I tried it out and the results that I got were really impressive. There are other apps that you can use, but from what I read, this was the easiest app to use. And my God, it was so simple. All I did was log in, and then I said, go bring me my Steam games. It popped up the QR code, which then I just scanned with my phone, and it logged me right in. And I was able to download and install games on this that were only available on Steam, which is amazing. I will say trying to find your games, especially if you have lots of games in this list, is ridiculous. These are the games that I have on Steam, and if I scroll through this, you can see they are in no particular order. Let's say that I wanted to install a game. If I tapped on, say, Lego Batman here and I hit get game, afterwards it would bring me back to the screen, but then it would scroll all the way up to the top, and then I would have to scroll back down, and there's no way to know like where you were. Luckily, there is a button where you can press Y and then you can search for a specific game that you want to load on there, but for browsing your games, it's a huge hassle and not worth it. Here you can see I'm launching Sonic Mania through Steam on the AYN Thor, and we're waiting to see if it worked or not. And it did, except that, as you can see, it started in this little tiny window. You're going to run into some weird bugs like that. So what you do in this case is I'm going to hit the start button. I'm going to see if I can navigate the settings and change how big that screen is. We'll say A for OK. And I'll come all the way down here to options and video. And we'll say full screen on. And yes. There we go. Yes, we'll keep it. Now we've got full screen, and I can go up and I can launch into Sonic Mania, although it looks like my save game did not transfer over, which is different than on other games that I was playing. Like I played Ball X Pit, and my save game had transferred over. That's a little strange and definitely interesting. But here I am playing Sonic Mania. It's a Steam game, and I'm playing it right here on this. Next up, let's take a look at the options that we have with our games. I can check compatibility. Right now, it's going to tell me the Rogue Legacy 2 is unknown compatibility. I'll go ahead and close that. But I can go into my PC game settings, and here's where you can change a bunch of stuff. You can change what resolution the game is running at. You can enable or disable Mango HUD. You can come over here to compatibility, and you can change which version of Proton that you're using. There's a lot of stuff in here, and I feel like I'm not going to slow down this video by talking about all of that stuff. If you guys want me to do a whole video just on Game Hub and how it works, let me know in the comment section down below that like button. Now, one thing I will say about Game Hub is originally I was going to say that I recommend that you switch this over to the Xbox style so that your A button is down here when you're playing PC games. I actually recommend against that now, and the reason why is every time that I have switched over to Xbox style in order to play a PC game and then switched back to standard style or Nintendo style in order to play an emulation game, well, what happens is my keybinds that I have done in, we'll say something like DuckStation, those keybinds will suddenly not work anymore, and I'll have to go back through and rebind all of the different inputs in DuckStation, and then again in whatever I'm using for PS2, I think Nether SX2 or something like that. So if you switch this button right here, be prepared to rebind things, not in RetroArch, but in a bunch of other stuff. And when it comes to performance, that's always going to depend on what kind of games you're running. So for example, I played Ball Pit, and I was usually able to hit right around 60 frames per second. This was using the medium preset, which then about halfway through my match, I upped it to the high preset because I started to get some slowdown as more and more things were bouncing around on the screen. So that is something to keep in mind. You're definitely going to be only interested in playing low power games on a device like this when it comes to Steam games. All right, let's talk about the dual screens. Obviously, for games that are on the DS or the 3DS, I think it's obvious the way that I use it. But for pretty much everything else, I've been using the bottom screen as a podcast player. I get most of my podcasts through YouTube Music. So I downloaded YouTube Music, and then I just put that on the bottom screen while I'm playing a game on the top screen. It is important to note that if you're using a 120 hertz and black frame insertion on the top screen. Because the bottom screen is 60 Hertz, what's going to happen is you're going to start to get tearing. So that has made me use black frame insertion less, only because I don't like the look of tearing on the bottom screen. That being said, if you're just listening to the podcast and you're not actually looking at the podcast, you can just turn off the video version of the podcast while you're listening to it. And then you can use the 120 Hertz and black frame insertion, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. I got to say, the screens on this look absolutely fantastic. I love that they went with AMOLED. You know, black frame insertion with 120 Hertz has never looked better than it does on this device, at least for me. Also on the bottom screen, when I'm watching a video podcast, because most video podcasts are recorded at 1080p or 4K, and then you're watching them on this tiny little screen on the bottom, they just look super crisp and clear. And I cannot get over how good podcasts look on this bottom screen while I'm playing something on the top screen. And then when it comes to pocketability, yesterday I was working on my review for this, and my kids came over and we sat down for dinner. And when I got up, I just chucked it in my pocket without really thinking about it. And then I just forgot that it was in there until about halfway through dinner. I was reaching into my pocket for something and I was like, oh, well, I forgot that I had that in there. This is super pocketable, and it is just about the perfect form factor for me. And if you want to pick up one of these for yourself, there are affiliate links in the description down below that like button. But from the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Thanks for watching. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. Stay rad, everybody.